Even the excuse that he's giving for these Paris tariffs today of fentanyl is completely bogus, completely unjustified, completely false. So we actually have to fold back on the one thing he has said repeatedly, that what he wants is to see a total collapse of the Canadian economy, because that'll make it easier to annex us.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau with a history-making statement on what's really behind Donald Trump's trade war with Canada. As of midnight, Trump slapped a 25% tax on all Canadian goods heading south of the border, except for energy, which will see a 10% tax instead. A minute after those tariffs came into effect, Canada's first round of counter tariffs on $30 billion worth of U.S. goods in turn came into effect. Let me show you a little bit more, if we could pull up on screen, about what those counter tariffs look like. There will be two different tranches. The first, as I mentioned, came into effect at 12:01, mostly applying to consumer-based products in 3 weeks after 21 days of consultations. The second tranche, worth about $125 billion, will come into effect. And you can see some of the products there that will be targeted with those countermeasures. To talk more about Canada's response and what's ahead, I'm joined live in studio by Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly. Hi, Minister. It's good to see you. Thank you very much for making the time.
Thank you.
Just moments ago, I have to start with some breaking news on our watch and see, if you've heard anything, if you can help us interpret it. Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary for Donald Trump, was on Fox News, and he appeared to make statements to the effect that there could be some kind of rollback in the cards as of tomorrow. I'm going to play that clip so you can hear it from his mouth, and then we'll get your reaction. Let's take a listen.
He's going to come out today angry that Americans are still being killed. Now, both the Mexicans and the Canadians were on the phone with me all day today trying to show that they'll do better. And the president's listening because, he's very, very fair and very reasonable. So I think he's going to work something out with them. It's not going to be a pause, none of that pause stuff. But I think he's going to figure out, you do more, and I'll meet you in the middle some way. And we're going to probably be announcing that tomorrow. So somewhere in the middle will likely be the outcome. The president moving with the Canadians and Mexicans, but not all the way.
I imagine, Minister, you've been engaged in conversations today. Does that in any way come as a surprise? Have there been any indications that something like that is coming?
Listen, before the U.S. launched its trade war, they didn't have any communications with us, any of us. And there are many, many of us that were in contact with the Trump administration until then. They didn't only do that to us, they did that to the Mexicans as well. So this is clearly a strategy. We'll see what will happen in the State of Union speech of the president tonight before Congress. But let's be frank, we've done the work at the border. We are there securing our border. We've done everything to make sure that the Americans would be happy. There's no crisis at the border. And right now, what President Trump is trying to do is to use his executive powers based on the fact that there is apparently a national security crisis at the northern border, which is false, to make sure that ultimately he can kick us around and ultimately bully us into a position of imposing 25% tariffs, which is completely unacceptable. So we'll continue to work with the Trump administration. As the head of the diplomacy in Canada, of course, I will talk to the Secretary of State tomorrow at noon, Marco Rubio. We already have a phone call scheduled, and we'll find solutions. But fundamentally, what is at risk is the fact that the U.S. is trying to create a lot of unpredictability, a lot of pressure on the Canadian economy that will cost hundreds of thousands of jobs across the country. So, based on that, we are reacting strongly. We are going ahead with our list of $155 billion worth of tariffs, like you were mentioning, a first phase of $30 billion, and we will fight back. Because what is really important for all of those who are watching us right now is Canada has a real purchasing power. We all do. Why? Because we're the biggest client of the Americans. We buy more from the Americans than the UK, China, Japan, and France all together. So when we say, no, we don't want to buy certain products from the US, that is affecting companies, businesses, and affecting jobs in in the U.S. in key Republican states. And that's what we need to continue to do, because at the end of the day, Vashi, what is clear and everybody in Canada needs to understand is only the American people will be able to stop their president from imposing these tariffs. Only them, when they understand that jobs are at stake, that it's costing more at the pump for them, more at the grocery store, that they will be able to say it's enough, and ultimately we will prevail.
In a few moments, we're going to speak live on this program to the governor of Kentucky about that very impact that you detail. Is there, is there engagement that has taken place today? For example, the Prime Minister earlier said he would, he has been reaching out. He hoped to have a conversation with President Trump. Has any of that taken place? And do you put any stock into what Howard Lutnick said there, to be blunt?
To be blunt, the only person that really does a deal is the president. And the people around him are always trying to guess what he will do. So, of course, I will continue to engage with Howard Lutnick, and particularly Dominic LeBlanc, the Minister of Finance, will do so. But at the end of the day, none of them know exactly what the president wants. And I'm being frank with Canadians right now, because they ought to know. We've been dealing with this for now weeks, but we were very respectful until they launched a trade war. But right now, we've never seen that in 155 years from the Americans. We're the canary in the coal mine. They've done that to us, their biggest trading partner, their best friends, best neighbor. They've done that to Mexico. And they said this week they would do that to the Europeans as well.
Today, in the Prime Minister's comments, there didn't seem to be a lot of ambiguity about what he felt the motivation behind this was. And I think a lot of Canadians would have listened to, in particular, the comments about crushing Canada's economy in the name of annexation, and stopped in their tracks. I think a lot of people are full of anxiety, thinking about the Prime Minister for the first time directly saying, that's what I think is behind this. What is your message to them right now?
Well, two things. First, the Americans have said that to us in private conversations.
But you thought it was a joke a few months ago.
No. From the moment that President Trump said himself that he wanted to use the economic power to make sure that he would really weaken the Canadian economy, you have to take the president to his word. And they've put many things on the table, not only linked to the economy, linked to military cooperation, linked to security partnerships, linked to water, etc. And meanwhile, they were always talking officially about the border. So fundamentally, what is at stake here is our sovereignty and Canadians' jobs and Canadian way of life. So I think that once we've accepted that that's what's going on, and I get it, there is a shock linked to that. I had that shock early on when the first time I went to Mar-a-Lago in December. But my job has been to engage, the Prime Minister as well. We've done everything that is necessary. I've gone to Europe, the Prime Minister as well, to talk to our allies. And meanwhile, we have a way to fight against this. We can use our purchasing power. We can make sure that we're united. We know that when we're united, we win, because what is going on in the U.S. is they're divided. We know that Republican states and Democrats, the Democratic state, they don't agree necessarily. We know that a lot of people within the Republican Party don't agree with the imposition of tariffs. We've heard that. What we need to do is to be united, use our purchasing power, make sure we buy Canadian, send a clear message. Meanwhile, for all of those also that have American families and friends at home, please talk to them. They need to engage. They need to make sure they send a message to the governors, the senators, the lawmakers, everybody. It is important, because that's how we will be able to prevail.
On the question of unity, I did want to talk about something else that the Prime Minister mentioned, and you have as well. The prospect of a response that is not necessarily counter tariffs, that is different in nature. We've heard it floated today very specifically by Ontario's Premier Doug Ford, who said, I'm willing, if this gets worse, to shut off electricity or to tax it. There are other resources that the United States really depends on. 60% of their crude oil imports comes from Canada, 80% of their fertilizer, so we're talking about potash from Saskatchewan. The premiers that represent Alberta and Saskatchewan have expressed, in the lightest way, hesitation, in the strongest way, a complete opposition to messing, essentially, with those exports. Would the federal government proceed with using those levers, with adding an export tax, or, for example, blocking the export of those resources without the consent of those premiers?
So our goal, I just said to you, is unity. We want to make sure that we have a good deal for all provinces, because we know if we're united, we can win. If we're divided, we can't. But we also heard that, indeed, when we say $1.7 billion more for farmers in the U.S. because we could make sure that we do something on fertilizers, trust me, when I talk to governors and senators in Congress from different rural states in the U.S., they listen and they understand. So we can do different things. We can make sure that we put everything on the table, but meanwhile, we work on having a fair deal. And this is clearly my commitment. This is the commitment of our government, because ultimately we cannot pick one side or another. We can't say a job in Ontario or Quebec, where I'm from, is more important than a job in Alberta. This is not what's going to happen in this country. We'll use this crisis as an opportunity to be stronger together.
I guess, though, I need clarity, because what I heard you saying earlier, the Prime Minister, is no one region should unfairly shoulder the burden, right? But that can mean, A, that you're going to compensate them for any burden that they do shoulder, or B, that you're unwilling to go forward without their consent. Like, will you pursue those measures if you think it's in the national interest, despite the opposition of those premiers? Can you answer specifically?
So I think that while there is a bit of public positioning of different premiers across the country, there's a lot of good conversations happening meanwhile, because I think everybody is in solution mode. Yes, oil and gas is affected by 10%, but all the rest of the economy in Alberta is affected by 25%. All the economy in everything that is, exported to the U.S. from Saskatchewan is also affected. So we will continue to have these conversations. I know that the Prime Minister was meeting with the premiers this afternoon. I have not had the chance yet to talk to him since that meeting. I think it was an important one, because Vashi, this is the first time that the U.S. is not only saying that they will be imposing 25% tariffs against us, they're actually doing it. Mm-hmm. And so that's, I think, a pivotal moment also in the relationship.
I did also want to ask you about the counter tariffs and what your government plans to do with the revenue. Can you be explicit with Canadians tonight? Is that going to go back to people who are impacted by these tariffs and sectors, or will it be put into general revenue and used for whatever purpose the government wants? Because I think there is a discernment for Canadians. Yeah,
well, for sure, we want to make sure that Canadians are supported, clearly, because it's not true that the government will make money out of this. No, because Canadians will be affected by this. This will have an impact on prices. And so we need to make sure that we have a fair way to give back money to Canadians, and also to different sectors that are supported. That conversation needs to happen. And I know that not only the Prime Minister will be having that conversation, but also the future leader of the Liberal Party that will be elected over the weekend, which will become Prime Minister, will have to take that decision.
But again, does that mean that that's exclusively what you're going to spend it on? Can you guarantee to Canadians tonight it's not going to go to other program spending?
There's various ways of supporting Canadians, and we need to decide how. And the ministers of finance and the minister also, and the Prime Minister and the future Prime Minister will take that decision. But the very principle behind it will be to make sure that we support Canadians, and that ultimately the sectors that are most impacted, like I was saying, will be supported. We did that when Trump, during his first mandate, imposed tariffs on steel and aluminum. And we were there to support workers, but also businesses that were more affected in that sector.
Doesn't Parliament, though, need to endorse, for example, if in 10 days, as the Premier says, the auto sector collapses, any kind of bailout that your government would be considering putting forward? Doesn't it need to be in session, as both leaders of the opposition are asking your government to do?
Well, that's definitely a decision that the Prime Minister and also the future Prime Minister, as of Monday, will have to take.
And shouldn't it be in session right now, though, given the severity of this crisis, the way in which the Prime Minister described the threat to our sovereignty, the kind of support that's going to be out there? Do you regret kind of putting your party's interests ahead of the national interests in this moment, just where Parliament is concerned?
No, but listen, for myself, I decided to choose my country first. I asked myself, you know, whether I wanted to be the first woman in leading the Liberal Party of Canada. I said to myself, yes. Do I want to let go my responsibilities as foreign minister at a crucial moment between Canada and the U.S.? I said, no, I can do both. And so basically, I decided to choose my country over my party. And that's what I'll continue to do. And that's what I know the Minister of Finance will continue to do. And so you have a really team of seasoned negotiators, leaders of the government that are doing the work. And also, I think that the Prime Minister sent a clear message today. And he was addressing in a very clear way, I think one of the clearest way that any politician in the past decades have said to Canadians what was really going on. And that's true political leadership.
All right, I'm going to leave it on that note. I'm out of time. I appreciate your time as always, Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly.